Welcome to Darkverse. I'm Isaac Nightshade, and tonight we venture into one of the most unsettling legends in American history. This isn't fiction. This isn't folklore dressed up in shadow. This is the true story of the Bell Witch, a voice in the dark, a curse that spanned generations, a presence that refused to be forgotten. From whispers in the cornfield to the cold silence of a haunted cave, this is a tale of torment, obsession, and a spirit so powerful she promised to return, and just might have. Turn down the lights, close the door, and whatever you do, don't listen too closely, because she's still out there, and she's been waiting for you. Chapter 1, Whispers in the Cornfield. It was a quiet evening in the autumn of 1817. The fields around the Bell family farm in Adams, Tennessee, lay still under the setting sun, golden with the last warmth of the day. John Bell stood near the edge of his cornfield, the worn brim of his hat pulled low over his eyes, a sack of seeds slung over one shoulder. He had been working since early morning, and now as the light began to fade, he was ready to head home. But just as he turned to leave, he saw something. At first he thought it was a dog, or maybe a wolf, moving between the rows of tall corn. Its back was hunched, its head too large for its body, and its gait uneven. The creature stopped and turned its head toward him. John's heart skipped a beat. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with the reflection of the setting sun, but with something colder, something that felt alive in the wrong way. He took a step forward. The thing stared at him a moment longer, then slipped back into the corn, vanishing without a sound. He rushed forward, pushing through the stalks. Nothing. No movement, no tracks, just silence. John Bell was not a man to scare easily. A veteran of war, a churchgoer, and a respected member of the community, he had faced hardship and danger many times before. But as he walked back to the house that evening, a strange heaviness pressed on his chest. He said nothing to his wife, Lucy, or to the children, just ate quietly and went to bed early. That night, the knocking began. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, like the tip of a branch hitting the side of the house. Tap, tap, tap. But then it grew louder. It came from the walls, the doors, even the floorboards. Sometimes it moved from room to room, as if someone or something was circling the house. Lucy sat up in bed. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. John nodded. "I'll check it out." He lit a lantern and moved through the house, checking every door and window. Everything was locked. The wind was calm. Outside, the fields were still. But the knocking followed him. The children heard it too. Betsy, the youngest daughter, clung to her older brother Jesse, both wide-eyed and afraid. The sounds didn't stop until dawn. When the rooster crowed, the knocking ceased. They tried to explain it away. Maybe animals in the walls, maybe the wind, had picked up after all. But deep down, they knew better. The next night, it returned, and this time it brought something else with it. The blankets were pulled off the children as they slept. Betsy screamed as cold hands touched her face, leaving no marks but chilling her to the bone. Chairs shifted across the floor. Dishes rattled in their cabinets, and in the stillness between each noise, they heard it. Whispers, too soft to understand, too cruel to ignore. Word spread through the small community. Neighbors came to help. They prayed with the family. Some stayed overnight to witness it for themselves, and they did. They heard the knocking, the whispers. They felt the cold that sank into the bones, even when the fire was roaring. John Bell turned to the church for answers. Ministers and elders visited the home. They read scripture aloud, splashed holy water, and demanded the spirit leave. It only laughed, or rather, it made a sound like laughter, dry, bitter, and mocking. Each night brought something new. The whispers became clearer. They spoke names, family secrets, scripture. Sometimes it sounded like a young girl, other times like an old woman. Then there were voices that didn't sound human at all. One night, Lucy woke up to the sound of someone humming in her room. She turned and saw a figure at the edge of the bed. It looked like Betsy, but Betsy was asleep in the next room. The figure smiled, then faded into the shadows. John's health began to decline. His hands shook during the day. He lost weight, He slept only in short bursts, never deep, always listening, waiting. The children changed too. Jessie, once confident and bold, walked with nervous eyes. Betsy, once joyful, now kept to herself. She drew pictures of strange shapes in dark woods. She spoke less and less. The Bell farm, once lively, grew quiet. Even the animals seemed disturbed. The horses refused to approach the barn after sundown. The dogs barked at nothing and sometimes cowered in the corners of the house. Neighbors stopped visiting. Rumors began to spread. Some said the family had invited something dark into their home. Others whispered of witchcraft. Some believed it was punishment from God. But the Bells knew none of those were true. They hadn't summoned it. They hadn't sinned. Whatever it was had come on its own, and it wasn't leaving. One night after hours of torment, John Bell sat at the kitchen table with his oldest son, John Jr. The fire had burned low. The rest of the house was asleep or pretending to be. "It's not just a ghost," John Bell said quietly. "It's something else, something older. It knows us. It's not guessing. It knows." John Jr. nodded slowly. He had heard it whisper his thoughts, his dreams, things he had never spoken aloud. "We need help, Pa." John Bell looked into the dying flames. "Then let's find it, before it breaks us." And so, the Bell family would begin their search for answers. But the deeper they dug, the more they would realize that what haunted them wasn't just a spirit. It was a voice from a place darker than death, louder than silence, and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The whispers in the cornfield were just the beginning. Chapter 2. The Night Visitors. The wind moved gently through the trees that surrounded the Bell farmhouse. It was early November, and the chill in the air had settled like a quiet warning. In the dark hours of the night, all seemed peaceful from the outside. But inside the Bell family's world was starting to unravel. It began with the children. One night, as young Drew Bell pulled the covers up to his chin, he felt something tug them away. He blinked in the darkness, thinking perhaps he had kicked them off himself. He reached down, pulled the quilt back up, and rolled onto his side. Moments later, the covers were yanked with more force. So sudden, so sharp, that it caused him to sit up with a gasp. In the next room, Betsy Bell had her own battle. She too felt something pulling her sheets. Then came the whisper, a soft, hushed voice, so close to her ear it felt like breath. "Betsy!" She froze, her eyes wide in the darkness. She knew she hadn't imagined it. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would wake everyone in the house. She whispered a prayer under her breath, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling above, waiting for morning light. But the whisper came again. "Betsy." The voice had weight now, an edge. It didn't belong to anyone in her family. She wanted to scream but could only lie there, paralyzed by fear. At breakfast the next morning, John and Lucy Bell sat at the table, sipping coffee, their faces drawn. The children were unusually quiet. "None of you slept well, did you?" Lucy asked. Drew shook his head. "The covers. Someone kept pulling them off me." "I heard something," said Betsy, her voice soft. "A voice." The room fell still. John Bell looked from one child to another. "This house is old. You hear creaks and drafts. It's just the wind." "But it said my name," Betsy replied. John frowned. Lucy placed a hand on his arm, as if to say, "Not now." They had already seen enough in the past weeks. The knocking, the strange creatures, the unease that hung like fog in every room. But now, it was targeting the children. That night, they tried something new. John placed a loaded rifle by the fireplace. "If someone's sneaking in," he muttered, "I'll catch them myself." The fire was low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The family tried to sleep, but the atmosphere had changed. Every sound seemed louder, every creak stretched longer, as if the house itself was waiting for something. Then it began again. Thuds against the walls. Sharp, quick knocks that traveled from one end of the house to the other. It wasn't the wind. It moved with intention. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always deliberate. And then laughter. High-pitched, childlike, almost mocking. John sprang from his bed rifle in hand. He threw open the door, shouting into the darkness. "Who's there?" Silence. No footsteps, no movement. Just the cold night air pressing in through the open door. He slammed it shut and locked it tight. The laughter returned, this time from inside the house. Lucy screamed as the kitchen door slammed itself. Chairs toppled. The air grew thick, harder to breathe, like something invisible was closing in on them. The family gathered in the main room, clinging to each other, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. Over the next few days, the Bell children were too afraid to sleep in their rooms alone. Betsy especially seemed shaken. She told her mother she felt watched, followed. When she walked through the house, she often felt a cold breath behind her ear or the lightest tap on her shoulder, only to turn and find no one there. The whispers became a nightly torment. They no longer said her name. Now they mocked her. Liar. Pretty little liar. Joshua doesn't love you? Betsy had not told anyone about her feelings for Joshua Gardner, the boy from school. Yet somehow the voice knew. It always knew. Lucy tried to protect her children the only way she knew how, through prayer. She placed a small Bible beside each of their beds, lit candles in every room, and whispered hymns until her voice cracked. But the spirit, or whatever it was, seemed only to grow stronger. Word began to spread around the small town of Adams. Neighbors whispered behind hands, curious eyes drifting toward the Bell home. Some offered support, others distance. A few brave souls volunteered to spend the night in the house, curious to see if the stories were true. One night, John invited his friend James Johnston and his wife to stay. James was a respected churchgoer, a calm man who believed in reason. That evening, as the Bells and Johnstons sat together after dinner, the house remained quiet. Almost too quiet, they prayed together. Read scripture, laughed lightly, pretending things were normal. Then the knock came, hard and sudden, on the front door. John stood quickly. "Stay seated," he said, opening the door to nothing but darkness. No one was there. Then came a knock behind them, on the back wall, then on the window, then on the ceiling. James looked pale, sweat dotting his brow. The whispering began, all around them. Not one voice, but many. Male and female, young and old, all at once. A tangle of sounds too garbled to understand, but angry, very angry. James's wife clutched her chest. "James, we must leave," she whispered. They stayed the night, out of pride more than courage. But in the morning, James admitted to John Bell, "This is no ordinary haunting. There's something in your house, and it means harm." The Bell Witch, as she would come to be called, was growing bold. She began to play tricks, stealing objects, moving things, knocking dishes from shelves. But her favorite target remained, Betsy. One night, Betsy let out a blood-curdling scream. John rushed into her room to find her lying on the floor, her cheek red and swollen as if someone had slapped her with tremendous force. "I didn't see anyone," she cried. "I didn't see anyone." The family was breaking down. The younger children cried constantly. Lucy grew pale and tired. John paced the halls like a guard, rarely sleeping. Every day the events grew worse. Every night something new happened. Furniture moved by itself. Voices sang lullabies in languages no one understood. Once, a Bible burst into flames for no apparent reason. People began calling it witchcraft. One evening, Lucy heard humming from the nursery, a soft, gentle tune, almost like a lullaby. She walked in slowly, expecting to find one of her daughters there. The rocking chair moved slowly, creaking back and forth. But the room was empty. She whispered, "Who's there?" The humming stopped. Then a woman's voice answered softly, "You, no me." Lucy staggered back. Her knees gave out, and she fell to the floor in prayer, trembling. That was the night the family finally admitted it. They weren't dealing with a ghost. This was something else. Something that chose to stay. Something that fed on fear. Something that was only just beginning. Chapter 3. Kate makes herself known. The Bell home had changed. What once stood as a place of laughter, hard work, and warm meals had grown cold. The very air felt different, heavier, as though the walls had soaked up all the light and joy and replaced it with something unseen and deeply wrong. After weeks of torment, whispers, and sleepless nights, the thing in their home decided it no longer wished to stay silent. It wanted to be known. It wanted to speak. It began one night after supper. The Bells sat quietly around the hearth, the fire snapping and hissing in the stillness. Lucy was knitting, her needles moving slowly, while John cleaned his pipe with steady hands. Betsy sat, nearby, her eyes locked on the flames, the flickering light dancing in her distant stare. Then from nowhere, a voice filled the room. "I am here." It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a moan carried by wind or a creak mistaken for speech. It was clear, unmistakable, and full of intent. The voice echoed through the room, chilling every heart within it. Lucy gasped, her knitting falling from her hands. John dropped his pipe and stood. "Who said that?" he barked. His voice was strong, but his face had gone pale. Silence. "Show yourself!" The fire crackled in response. Then laughter. A dry, raspy cackle that rolled out from every corner of the room. The sound of a woman amused by a secret only she knew. "I've always been here," the voice said, now softer. "You just never listened." From that moment on, the entity no longer hid. She, yes, she, spoke often and without hesitation. She called herself Kate. When asked who she was, the answers changed. Sometimes she said she was a spirit sent by God to punish John Bell. Other times she claimed to be the ghost of a neighbor, Kate Batts, wronged by John in a land dispute. But Kate Batts was still alive. So how could that be? "I'm whatever you think I am," she once said with a laugh. "I'm the shadow in your mirror, the breath on your neck. I am memory and future, and truth you don't want to hear." Her voice could mimic anyone, perfectly. She would repeat conversations word for word, often ones held far from the Bell house. She once recited a full sermon delivered by the local preacher, including every stumble and pause. When asked how she could have heard it, she answered, "I go where I like." The Bells were no longer alone in their suffering. Visitors continued to arrive, ministers, skeptics, friends, and strangers. They wanted to hear the spirit for themselves, and Kate never disappointed. She mocked them. She debated scripture with the clergymen and corrected their mistakes. She told secrets, deep, private ones, that left men red-faced and shaking. She repeated things that had been said in confidence, some from miles away. The more she spoke, the more power she seemed to gather. At times she was charming, even helpful. She predicted a neighbor's sudden illness before it happened. She warned Lucy when the barn's roof would leak from rain. But these moments were few, like bait on a hook. Most often she was cruel. She insulted John, calling him a liar, a thief, a sinner. She spoke of his past, of things no one else could have known. She tormented Betsy with words of self-doubt, whispering that she was ugly, unworthy, unloved. "Joshua will leave you," Kate said one night as Betsy sat alone. "He sees the darkness in you, just like I do." The girl burst into tears. The family tried everything. Again, more ministers, more prayer, holy water, crosses, oil. Kate would vanish for a day, sometimes two, but always returned. And each time she came back, she was stronger. Sometimes she sang old folk songs, lullabies, hymns in languages no one understood. Her voice ranged from high and soft to deep and guttural, switching mid-sentence with terrifying ease. And then came the night she showed herself. Betsy was lying in bed, the candle still burning low beside her. She had just begun to drift off when she felt the room grow cold. Not cool, not drafty, cold, like a cellar in winter. She opened her eyes. A woman stood at the foot of her bed. She wore a long dress, black as ash, her face covered by a thin veil. Her hands were long and pale, fingers like branches. Betsy tried to scream, but no sound came. The woman raised one finger to her lips, then smiled beneath the veil and vanished. Betsy screamed then. The house rushed to her room, only to find her curled in a ball, sobbing, pointing at nothing. John Bell stared into the empty space. "She's getting braver," he said. "No," Lucy whispered. "She's getting ready." As days passed, Kate's voice became a regular presence in the house. She talked during meals, sang during chores, laughed at bedtime. The Bells had no peace. Even the animals began to act strange. Chickens refused to enter the coop. Cows avoided certain fields. Some visitors still came. One was a man named Richard Powell, Betsy's teacher. A thoughtful man, deeply in love with her, though quiet about it. He believed in reason, not superstition. But even he left the Bell house shaken. One evening, after reading aloud by the fire, Richard stood to leave. Kate's voice called out, mocking him gently. The teacher's heart beats faster around Betsy. "Is that proper, Richard?" He turned red. "I won't entertain foolishness." "Foolishness," Kate echoed in a deeper voice, like a growl, "is thinking I don't know your thoughts." He never returned. One of the last to visit during those early months was a clergyman from Kentucky. He came with books, crosses, and a strong belief that faith alone could drive out evil. He left the next morning, shaken and silent, refusing to speak of what happened. All he said was, "That voice does not come from God." The Bell family had reached a point beyond fear. They lived under siege. Kate had become a part of the house, its darkest corner, its coldest breath. They tried to pretend otherwise during the day. They went about their work, smiled for neighbors. But at night, the truth returned, louder than ever. Kate was not going away, and the worst was yet to come. Chapter 4, 30-Year Torment of Betsy Bell. By the time winter set in, the spirit had made one thing painfully clear. Its hatred for young Betsy Bell was far more personal than anyone had imagined. Betsy was just 12 when the haunting began. Bright, cheerful, curious. She loved the wildflowers behind the barn and spent her free time drawing in the dirt with sticks or weaving garlands from field grass. But those simple joys had vanished. Now she flinched at sudden sounds. She slept with a candle burning low beside her bed and prayed in whispers before laying her head down, dreading the moment her eyes would close. Because that's when Kate came. At first, the attacks were unseen. Cold touches on her arms, sheets pulled from her bed, whispers so close to her ears they tickled her skin. But slowly, it became physical. One night, John Bell found Betsy sprawled on the wooden floor of her room, clutching her stomach, her cheek red from a hand-shaped welt. "She slapped me," Betsy cried, and she laughed. Kate's cruelty toward her wasn't constant. It came in waves. Some nights, so she'd be left alone entirely. And that's what made it worse. Betsy never knew when the torment would begin. The silence became just as terrifying as the sounds. Waiting was its own kind of torture. Word of the girl's suffering spread beyond the town. The Bell house had become infamous now, a place of whispered legends, fearful curiosity, and strange guests. People from all over came to Adams, Tennessee, hoping to witness the spirit, but they weren't always prepared for what they found. "She's sweet," Kate would say mockingly when visitors met Betsy. "So sweet she rots." Sometimes the voice would mimic Betsy's own words, twisting her prayers, mocking her cries. It called her names no 12-year-old should ever hear. It told her she was cursed, that she was the reason for all the pain in the house. "Everyone suffers because of you," it whispered. "You brought me here." Of course, Betsy hadn't. She was just a child, but the voice didn't care. There was one person who made things bearable, Joshua Gardner, a neighbor boy, tall and kind, with bright eyes and a gentle laugh. He'd known Betsy since they were small, and as they both grew older, their friendship quietly shifted into something deeper. They never said the word love, but it was there, soft and tender, in every smile and shy glance. But Kate hated Joshua. Whenever he visited, the house would fall into chaos. Objects flew from shelves. The walls thudded with invisible fists. Once a mirror shattered just as Joshua reached for the doorknob. "I don't want him here," Kate declared. He doesn't belong to you. It wasn't just talk. The spirit began to target Joshua as well, hearing voices at night, having nightmares when he hadn't before. Once, as he walked Betsy home, he felt a shove so hard it nearly threw him to the ground. I think she's jealous, Betsy whispered one afternoon. She sat on the porch, with Lucy, hands trembling in her lap. Lucy didn't respond. She just held her daughter's hand tighter. The attacks on Betsy became more violent. She was scratched, slapped, pushed, sometimes choked by hands no one could see. Bruises appeared overnight. Her schoolwork slipped. Her laughter vanished. She stopped going to town, stopped smiling. Her eyes looked too old for her young face. One morning she didn't come down for breakfast. Lucy found her in bed staring at the ceiling, silent. She kept me up all night, Betsy whispered. She won't let me sleep. John was growing desperate. He had begged every preacher he knew for help. He had offered money, horses, anything for peace. But nothing worked. Every remedy failed. Every prayer fell flat. Why won't she leave her alone? He asked one night, pacing the kitchen. Kate answered, her voice echoing from the chimney. Because she's mine. One night, something changed. Betsy woke to the feeling of being lifted from her bed. Her body rose several inches into the air before dropping suddenly back onto the mattress. She screamed. The family ran to her room, only to watch in horror as the invisible force gripped her hair and yanked her across the floor. John tried to grab her, but an unseen blow knocked him backward. "Leave her!" he cried. "She's just a child." Kate's laughter echoed through the house, rising and falling like waves. "She's not just a child. She knows." Knows what? That was the question no one could answer. The community began to change their tone. At first, the Bells had been pitied, but now people were afraid. Some whispered that Betsy had done something to invite the spirit. Others claimed she was possessed. Some said John had made a deal with the devil, and Betsy was the price. The family withdrew even further. Friends became strangers. Church members kept their distance. And in the middle of it all was Betsy, haunted, blamed, abandoned. Even Joshua, despite his love for her, was growing distant. "She won't stop until I leave him," Betsy confessed one day, her voice flat. Lucy stared at her. "You can't let her win. She's already won." The final straw came one evening when Joshua walked Betsy home. They stood under the old oak tree, the sun just dipping below the hills. It was a quiet moment, full of all the things they couldn't say out loud. "I'm not afraid of her," Joshua said softly. Betsy shook her head. "You should be." And then the wind shifted. A cold gust blew through the field, carrying with it a sound, half whisper, half growl. "Leave her or die." Joshua went pale. He never spoke of that night again. A week later, Betsy broke off the engagement. No one blamed her. No one asked why. The pain in her eyes was answer enough. Kate was silent that night. For the first time in weeks, there were no whispers, no thuds, no voices, just silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a creature satisfied, of a victory claimed. After the broken engagement, the attacks on Betsy lessened. She still heard whispers, still felt cold hands now and then, but the worst was over, at least for her. The spirit's attention was shifting again, and its next target would be John Bell. Chapter 5. General Jackson's Visit. By the spring of 1819, the legend of the Bell Witch had spread far beyond Adams, Tennessee. Stories of an invisible tormentor, a talking spirit, and a haunted girl had made their way down country roads, through smoky taverns, across church pulpits. Some called it a hoax, others called it the devil's work. But a few, just a few, believed it was something older, something unexplainable. One of those curious minds was General Andrew Jackson. Yes, that Andrew Jackson, the war hero, the soldier, the man who would one day become the 7th President of the United States. He had heard whispers of the Bell haunting during his travels and decided he had to see it for himself. "Sounds like nonsense," he reportedly said, "but if it's real, I want to witness it with my own eyes." So in the summer of that year, Jackson and a small group of men arrived just outside the Bell property with wagons, horses, and supplies. They were armed and skeptical, half laughing as they prepared for a night of ghost hunting. The Bell family, worn and weary from nearly 2 years of torment, welcomed them with tired eyes. They had no desire to entertain visitors, but Jackson's name carried weight. He stayed the night. The first few hours were quiet, too quiet. Jackson and his men sat in the Bell parlor, joking, sipping coffee, swapping stories of war and wilderness. Nothing happened. One of his men even mocked the family openly. "Is this the great Bell Witch?" he said. "Seems to me like someone's playing tricks. Probably that little girl." Lucy Bell stood to defend her daughter, but before she could speak, the air shifted. The fire dimmed. Though no wind had come through, the walls creaked. The dogs outside began barking wildly, then suddenly fell silent. Then came the voice. "Fools," it whispered. The room froze. "I warned you." Then the mocking soldier screamed. He dropped to the floor, writhing, as if being struck by invisible hands. His face turned red. His legs kicked. His hands clawed at the air. Jackson jumped up, reaching for the man, but something unseen threw him backward. The others tried to intervene but found themselves frozen, unable to move, as though held by some terrible force. Then just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The soldier gasped for breath, tears streaming down his face. The force lifted. The fire blazed again, and Kate laughed. "You may leave now," she said, "or stay. It makes no difference to me." Jackson reportedly stood in a stunned silence for several minutes. "I've seen battle," he finally said, "but I've never seen anything like that." He and his men left the next morning, quiet, pale, changed. The visit only added fuel to the fire. Now the haunting wasn't just a local tale. It was a national mystery, a story that even a general couldn't explain. People who once doubted now spoke more carefully. Strangers came in greater numbers, hoping to witness something themselves. Kate, as if feeding off the attention, grew stronger. Her voice now echoed not only in the Bell home, but in the fields, in the barn, in the woods. She knew names. She predicted. Whether she could recite entire books from memory, and she never let Betsy forget her presence. "I see you," she would whisper. "I know your dreams." But her new focus was shifting. John Bell. John had aged rapidly in those years. Once a strong, proud man, his hands now trembled and his speech had slowed. He spent long hours staring out windows or walking alone along the edge of the property, his brow furrowed in silent thought. Kate harassed him endlessly. She mocked his prayers, mimicked his voice, called him a fraud. She told him his time was almost up. "Old John," she sneered one night, "you've been judged. The ground is ready." Lucy pleaded for the spirit to stop. "Leave him alone. He's done nothing to deserve this." Kate's response was cold. "He knows what he did." No one ever found out what that meant. Not fully. Some believed it referred to a business deal gone wrong. Others said it was a lie. Just another way for the spirit to divide the family. But John believed it. That much was clear. He began waking up with blinding headaches, his vision blurred. He heard voices even when Kate was silent. He became forgetful, confused. One morning he didn't come down for breakfast. Lucy found him in bed, sweating and pale, his breathing shallow. He tried to speak but couldn't form the words. A small vial sat on his bedside table. No one knew how it had gotten there. Kate's voice came softly. "I gave him a little something special." The family summoned the doctor, who could do little. He inspected the vial and declared it filled with a dark, unidentified liquid. Poison, most likely. "Where did it come from?" he asked. Kate answered, "From me." The Bell family was shaken. Even those who had stopped believing in the spirit were forced to reconsider. John Bell was dying, and the cause was no longer a mystery. It was her, And yet, there was nothing anyone could do. The community mourned, even before John passed. People brought food, offered prayers, stood silently outside the Bell home, as if their presence could shield it. But Kate mocked them too. "He'll be gone soon," she said one night, "and I'll sing at his funeral." The family prayed harder, cried louder, but nothing stopped what was coming. The Bell Witch had claimed her next victim, and the end was near. Chapter 6. The Death Sentence. Winter returned to Adams, Tennessee, with sharp winds and bare trees that clawed at the gray sky. The Bell farm lay quiet beneath the cold, but inside the home, a storm brewed, one that no season could thaw. John Bell was dying. Everyone knew it. What began as simple headaches had grown into seizures. His speech slurred. He couldn't walk without stumbling. His once strong frame, shaped by years of labor, was now a shell. His eyes were tired, often blank, as if he was already drifting somewhere far away. And the spirit? She was louder than ever. "Old Jack's time is up," she crooned from the fireplace one night. Lucy Bell sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as she gripped her cup. "Please," she whispered into the empty room, "leave him alone. Just let him rest." But the voice answered with a hiss. "He doesn't get peace." No one truly knew why Kate hated John so fiercely. She had tormented Betsy, mocked the children, scared off visitors, but her vengeance was always sharpest with him. "You know why," she said once. "You buried it, but I remember." Some believed Kate was the spirit of Kate, Bats, a neighbor who had once accused John of cheating her in a land deal, but there was no proof. Others said the voice was lying, that it simply chose him as a target, but the effect was the same. John Bell was fading, and fast. The family tried everything. Doctors came and went, prescribing tonics and teas that did nothing. Ministers knelt beside John's bed, praying over him, their voices shaking beneath the weight of Kate's laughter. Neighbors brought warm meals and well wishes, none of which could comfort a man haunted from the inside out. Each night Kate would mock him. She'd list his failures, his sins, real or imagined. She'd sing lullabies twisted into curses. Sometimes she'd imitate his own voice, crying out in fear from the shadows. "She's breaking him," John Jr. said quietly to his mother. Bit by bit, Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "She already has." Then came the morning that changed everything, December 20th, 1820. John Bell didn't wake. Lucy found him lying still, his eyes closed, his breathing slow. His skin was cold to the touch. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. On the table beside his bed was a small brown vial filled with a dark liquid. "Did he take something?" Lucy asked aloud, panic rising in her voice. The spirit answered. "I gave it to him," Kate said calmly. "A little dose last night, while you all slept." Lucy screamed. The children rushed to the room, horrified by what they saw. John Jr. picked up the vial and held it to the light. "What is this?" he demanded. "Poison," the voice replied. "Enough to end a man." The doctor was called, but there was nothing to be done. He confirmed the contents of the vial were deadly, though no one could say exactly what it was. The doctor handed the vial to John Jr., who flung it into the fire. As the glass shattered and hissed in the flames, Kate howled with laughter. "You can burn it," she said, "but the deed is done." John Bell died the next day, December 21st. He was buried on the family land under a simple marker. The town turned out for the funeral. Some came to mourn, some came to gossip, some came to see if the spirit would truly keep her promise. Because Kate had said she would sing at the funeral, and she did. As the preacher delivered his sermon, a voice rose from nowhere and everywhere. It was a woman's voice, sweet at first, then sharp, mocking the prayers and quoting scripture in a twisted tone. "Dust to dust," Shikime echoed. "But not for you, old Jack. Not for you." The townsfolk stood frozen, unsure if they were witnessing a curse or a miracle. Some ran. Others crossed themselves, whispering prayers. The preacher's voice faltered, but he continued. He had to. It was the first funeral most had ever seen interrupted by a ghost. After John's death, the house fell into a strange silence. Kate didn't speak for days. No knocks, no whispers, no laughter, just silence. At first, Lucy thought maybe it was over, that the spirit had claimed what she came for and left. But it was a trick. On the fourth night after the funeral, the voice returned, softer, slower, but darker than ever. "I'm not done," Betsy screamed in her sleep that night. She dreamed of her father standing at the edge of her bed, his face blank, his mouth sewn shut. She awoke to cold air and the sound of humming, Kate's lullaby, rising and falling in the dark. John Jr. found writing on the barn wall the next morning, words carved deep into the wood. Blood answered, but the debt is not paid. The family knew then. The nightmare hadn't ended. For Nemata, something had changed. Kate no longer raged with the same energy. Her voice came less frequently. The violence had lessened. The house still felt wrong, still held its heavy air, but the daily chaos had softened. "She's fading," John Jr. said one night. Maybe she's losing strength." Lucy didn't answer. She was holding a candle, staring at John's chair in the corner of the room. It hadn't been moved since his death. "She got what she wanted," Lucy whispered, "but she won't ever let us forget." And Kate, listening as always, answered from the rafters, "Exactly." As the year came to an end, the Bell family tried to rebuild. The children returned to their studies. Lucy worked the farm as best she could. Betsy spent long hours alone beneath the old oak tree where she and Joshua used to meet. She still heard the voice now, and then sometimes it was cruel. Other times it was almost gentle, but it never left, not really. And then one day, Kate spoke of leaving. "I'll go soon," she said. "I've done what I came to do." Lucy clutched her chest. "Why now?" The voice was quiet for a moment. Then it answered, "Because this chapter is closed." She gave no further explanation, but she made a promise. "I'll return. Not now, not soon, but in 107 years. You'll remember me." And with that, Kate fell silent once more. The Bell Witch, as she had come to be known, faded from the house in the months that followed. Visitors reported nothing unusual. Betsy slept through the night. The doors stayed closed. The walls stopped knocking. Life moved on. But no one ever forgot. And deep in the woods, where the wind still whispered through the trees, some said they could still hear her, singing softly, waiting for her return. Chapter 7. The Broken Engagement. The weeks following John Bell's funeral passed like a dream. A heavy, sorrow-soaked dream that no one could fully wake from. The Bell house was quiet now, but not peaceful. The quiet was sharp-edged, like the breath before a scream, and every footstep felt like it echoed louder than it should. Betsy Bell moved through it like a ghost of her former self. She didn't smile anymore. Her hands shook when she held a cup of tea. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity and laughter, had grown distant. Though Kate's voice had faded, since John's death, Betsy knew better than to believe it was gone. It was still there, watching, waiting. But it wasn't just grief she carried. It was guilt. She couldn't shake the thought that somehow she had caused all this. The spirit's obsession with her had never made sense. She'd been just a girl, innocent, kind. Yet from the beginning, Kate had whispered her name with poison, had slapped her, tormented her, threatened anyone who came close, especially Joshua Gardner. Joshua had stood by her through it all. Even when others had run, even when Kate's fury lashed out at him, he had returned. They had grown up together, side by side in the fields and under the trees, their laughter rising with the wind. When he asked her to marry him, it had been the only joy she'd felt in months. But even that wasn't safe. From the moment she said yes, the spirit returned with a vengeance. "She's not yours," Kate had whispered in the dark. "You'll lose everything." Betsy woke, with bruises on her neck, finger marks where no hands had been. Joshua's visits were met with slamming doors and chilling winds. Once, the horses that pulled his wagon refused to step onto Bell land, eyes wild with fear. And then there were the dreams. Night after night, Betsy saw visions of her wedding day turned into a funeral. Joshua standing at the altar, only to find her casket instead of a bride. Her mother weeping, Kate's voice laughing in the trees. Each morning she awoke crying, exhausted, broken. In one afternoon, Betsy sat with her mother beneath the large oak tree that stood behind the house. It was their place, their only quiet spot where they could breathe. "I love him," she said quietly. Lucy looked at her daughter, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the tremble in her hands. "I know, child. I don't want to leave him, but she won't stop." Lucy said nothing for a long time. The wind moved softly through the grass. "She took your father from me," she finally said. "I won't let her take you, too." That night, Betsy made her decision. She wrote Joshua a letter by candlelight. Her hands shook with every word. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But she had to do it. She told him she couldn't marry him. That the pain, the fear, the shadow over their lives, it was too much. That she loved him, but she had to let him go. She sealed the letter with tears. The next day, she handed it to one of the farm hands to deliver. Then she went to her room and didn't come out until morning. Kate said nothing that night, but in the silence, Betsy felt it. Satisfaction. Joshua didn't respond, not in writing, not in person. He disappeared from her life like a leaf caught in a storm. She didn't blame him. She would have run too. And Kate, the spirit grew quiet. No more slaps, no more voices in the dark. Betsy slept for the first time in weeks. She woke up without dread. She walked the house without fear. But the victory was hollow. She had given up her happiness to buy back her peace. The Bell family began to believe it was truly over. No more knocking, no more screams, no more broken dishes or voices echoing through the halls. Visitors reported nothing unusual. Even the animals calmed. Betsy tried to rebuild her life. She returned to her studies, helped her mother with chores, took long walks along the river, but she never smiled the same way again. Kate had taken something that would never come back. Kanawin one night, nearly a month after breaking the engagement, Betsy stood alone at the edge of the woods. She lit a small lantern and held it out into the dark. "If you're still here," she whispered, "why me?" The wind moved the leaves, soft like breath. "I never did anything to you." Silence. Then, from behind her, the voice returned. "You were the one who could feel me." Betsy spun around, heart pounding, the lantern shaking in her hand. But there was no one there, only the sound of a woman's laughter fading into the night. Kate wasn't gone. She had simply gotten what she wanted, and now she was waiting. For what? No one knew. But the Bell family would soon learn. Kate always kept her promises. Chapter 8. The departure spring brought a strange kind of stillness to the Bell farm. The grass returned, green and full. The trees bloomed. Birds sang again, and the fields moved gently in the breeze, like they had before the first knock on the wall, before the whispers, before the fear took root. But inside the Bell house, no one felt peace. They were waiting, always waiting. Kate had been quiet for weeks now. Not gone, just silent. Her absence hung in the air like a held breath. The family tiptoed through their days, afraid to speak too loudly or laugh too freely, as if doing so might wake her. Then one morning, the voice returned. It was calm, almost tender. "I'm leaving soon." Lucy froze, her hands still wet from washing dishes. Betsy, sitting at the kitchen table, dropped her spoon. The words echoed through the walls, soft but clear. "I've done what I came to do." No one spoke. No one dared to ask why. They simply listened. That night, Kate spoke again, this time to John Jr. "You'll be strong," she told him. "This house is yours now." He didn't answer. He only stared at the fireplace, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. "Why us?" he whispered. The spirit laughed gently. "You were easy to find." The next few days were quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not like the silence before another storm, but like something was winding down, retreating. Even the animals seemed more at ease. The Bell home no longer felt like a battlefield. Then came the last night. It was late April. The family had gathered in the main room, not because they wanted to, but because something pulled them there, a shared feeling they couldn't explain. Lucy sat in her chair, Betsy on the floor with a blanket. John Jr. stood by the window, arms crossed. The house was still, no wind, no footsteps, just the soft creak of the old boards under their weight. Then the voice came. "You've been kind," it said. No mockery, no anger, just words. "Some of you have feared me. Some hated me. Some even tried to understand me." A pause. "But you endured." Lucy closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I will be gone," Kate continued, "for now. But I will return." Betsy looked up sharply. "Why?" she asked aloud. There was a long silence. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, "Because I said I would." It's before dawn. The house creaked one final time. The rocking chair in John's old room moved by itself. The kitchen door opened, then closed. A candle flickered and went out. And that was it. Kate was gone. The Bell family didn't celebrate. They didn't shout or cry or dance. They simply sat in silence, letting the air return to its natural stillness, waiting to see if it was real. The days that followed were the quietest the house had known in years. No knocks, no voices, no shadows in the hallway. Visitors who had once begged to enter now stayed away, afraid the peace was only a trick. But the family knew she was truly gone. Weeks turned into months. Betsy slowly found her rhythm again. She walked through the fields without glancing over her shoulder. She laughed, quietly at first, then freely. John Jr. took on more of the farm work, stronger and more focused than ever. Lucy smiled, again though her eyes still held the grief of a life torn apart. The house itself began to feel like home again. Neighbors who had once avoided them came back. The church welcomed them with open arms. Slowly the Bells stitched themselves back into the fabric of the community, but no one forgot. They couldn't. Not after what they'd seen, not after what they'd lived through. Before she left, Kate had made a promise. "I will return in 107 years. That date was marked in the minds of many, 1935. Most thought it was nonsense. Others weren't so sure. The land itself seemed to remember. Trees bent a certain way. The wind sometimes carried a whisper that felt too intentional to be chance. And beneath it all, the Bell house waited, just in case. Because Kate always kept her promises. Chapter 9, The Return of the Witch, 1935. Time passed. Generations were born and buried. The Bell name, once whispered in fear, became a story for the firelight. A legend, too. Strange to fully believe, but too persistent to forget. Adams, Tennessee, changed slowly. Roads were paved. Electricity came. Trains passed through the outskirts. But the land where the Bell farm once stood remained quiet, tucked away in memory and soil. And still, one date lingered in the minds of those who knew the story. 1935. It had been 107 years since Kate's departure. She had promised to return. By the early 1930s, local historians, folklore researchers, and ghost hunters had started flocking to Adams again. Some were curious skeptics. Others were true believers. A few were descendants of the Bell family themselves. They came with notebooks and recorders, cameras and journals. They interviewed old-timers who still remembered the whispers passed down from their grandparents. "Don't walk near the cave after dark," one man warned. "The wind talks there." "The house is long gone," said another, "but she's still around. You feel it in your bones." One of the main attractions was the Bell Witch Cave, a limestone cavern near where the Bell farm once stood. Over the decades, it had taken on a life of its own. Tourists claimed to hear voices, feel sudden cold, or see shadowy figures dart between the stones. In 1935, The cave became the center of attention. People gathered, they waited, they listened. On the night of July 13th, 1935, a group of Bell descendants and researchers held a small vigil outside the cave. No rituals, no theatrics, just quiet observation. They stayed until nearly dawn, taking shifts near the mouth of the cave, ears tuned for anything that might break the silence. At 3:12 a.m., a young woman named Evelyn, the great-great-granddaughter of John Bell Jr., claimed she heard whispering, faint, feminine. "She's listening," the voice said. Others said they heard nothing, but Evelyn never forgot it. "I know what I heard," she told a local paper weeks later. It was her. That same summer, strange events were reported throughout the town. Doors opening on their own, dogs barking at empty corners, children waking from nightmares, all describing the same woman in black with a veil. Once a Bible burst into flames during a church service. The preacher dismissed it as a tragic accident, but some looked at the back pew where a stranger had sat only moments before, dressed in black, face hidden, gone before the fire was put out. No deaths were blamed on Kate that year, no attacks like those that haunted the Bell family in the 1800s. But something had returned, a presence, an echo. Locals reported hearing a woman humming lullabies near the riverbank, the same songs Betsy Bell once whispered in her sleep. The cave saw an increase in incidents, cameras malfunctioning, voices captured on audio, footsteps with no source. It wasn't proof, at least not to the skeptics, but to the descendants of the Bells, it was more than enough. She came back, Evelyn told her children years later, not with fists or fury this time, but to remind us she never left. The town moved on, as towns do, but the story lived. Every few years, someone claimed a new encounter. Tourists snapped photos with strange shapes in the background. Historians debated the details. Locals whispered about what really happened in the woods at night. And every generation of the Bell family passed the same words to the next. She promised to return, and she did. But the scariest part was never the return. It was the possibility that she might come back again, this time without a warning, without a date, because the Bell Witch had never been just a ghost. She was a story, and stories never die. Chapter 10, The Legend, lives on. The Bell Witch is not just a story, it is a presence. It lives in whispers passed down through generations, in dark corners of Tennessee homes, in the memories of families who never asked to be part of something so unexplainable. And even today, more than 2 centuries after the first knock on the Bell family's cabin wall, her legend still breathes. They say stories fade. That time smooths out the edges of fear, but not this one. This one only grows. The Bell Witch Cave remains the centerpiece of the tale, a place where time feels heavy, where tourists speak of cold hands and distant voices. Skeptics come for the thrill, but many leave quiet, pale, unwilling to talk about what they may or may not have seen. Guides tell the story, by lantern light, of John Bell's torment, Betsy's cries in the night, the poison, the voice, the return. Each retelling carries a charge, like static in the air. And every so often, a candle flickers without wind. A recorder picks up sounds no one remembers making. People have written books, made films, hosted podcasts. Paranormal investigators set up equipment and spend long nights in the fields, in the cave, by the trees. Some find nothing. Others leave shaken. The town of Adams walks a fine line, part proud, part cautious. They welcome tourists, but not too deep. They share the legend, but not always the warnings. Because the Bell Witch isn't just a tale to them, she is a memory, a shadow. Descendants of the Bell family live quietly across the U.S. Some speak openly about their ancestry, others don't. The name carries weight in certain circles, paranormal, historical, even political. Many deny anything happened at all, but the story refuses to be buried. Every few years, new claims arise. A family hears knocking on walls with no source. A child speaks of a woman in a veil who sings to them in the dark. A preacher finds his Bible burned on the altar. And always someone mentions her name. Kate, the witch, the voice in the walls. What was she? A spirit, a demon, a curse given form. Some say the Bell Witch was simply trauma passed down, a family's pain made into myth. Others believe she was real, more real than anything else in the world. The truth is, we may never know. But what makes the Bell Witch story different, what makes it last, isn't just the horror. It's the echo. The way the story changes, but never dies. The way people feel it, even now. So if you ever find yourself in Adams, Tennessee, if you walk too far into the woods, if the night grows colder than it should, if you hear a whisper when no one's there, don't run, don't speak, just listen, because the Bell Witch isn't gone. She's just waiting for someone new to hear her. And when you do, you'll never forget her.